of the things you said in the beginning of your book, Love Thy Body, I want to shift gears, is that underneath of morality is not just a set of rules, but it's a worldview. And so the things you've been talking about that you learned from Schaeffer and thought about materialism, determinism, naturalism versus a Christian, view of the world. These are fundamentally different views of the world, views of reality. How does that argument about worldviews work its way out in Love Thy Body? How does worldview relate to our perception of the body?
Yeah, what I learned, let me back up.
Yeah, sure.
Schaeffer said the most important thing that Christians need to understand in order to communicate effectively to the non-Christian world today is that the truth itself has been split. That in secular academia, it's called the fact-value split. Christianity taught that the cosmos is a single unified system. There's a natural order and there's a moral order, but it's a unified whole, and therefore truth is a unified whole. After the scientific revolution, many people began to say, no, the only reliable knowledge we have is science, empirically testable facts. Well, what do you do then with moral and spiritual truths? You can't stuff them in a test tube or study them under a microscope. So many people began to say, no, they're not really truths. They're just your personal preference, your personal experience. And so truth was split then, the moral order from the natural order.
Right.
And Schaeffer used to use that. And he's not the only one. Many philosophers have used the metaphor of two stories in a building. So the lowest story, if you can kind of picture this in your mind, two levels. The lowest story is objective, what we know by science and reason and facts. And then moral and spiritual truths have been tossed into the upper story where they're not really truths anymore. They're just, your personal values. And so that was kind of the background. When I started approaching the moral issues, I was stunned to find that, well, if your concept of truth is split, it applies everywhere. So when I picked up the moral issues, I discovered that to understand the secular worldview, it has a split view of the human person. And it's sometimes called, so in the lowest story, what we know by science is the body, the physical reality. And then in the upper story is what how we value people, how we give them moral status. And so it was called the body-person dualism. The body in the lower story, the person in the upper story. And to illustrate, we can jump in with where that is the most obvious, which is the transgender issue. Because transgender activists argue explicitly that your body has nothing to do with your gender identity. That there's a split between the body and the person, that your body, may be male or female, and that tells you nothing about your gender identity, who you are as a person. There's a BBC documentary that says at the heart of the debate is the idea that your mind can be at war with your body. At war. That's a huge, conflict between your mind and your body. And of course, in that war, it's the mind that wins. Right? The mind wins, your body doesn't really count. And that's why we have, kids coming home from kindergarten, first grade, or coming home from school these days saying things like, my teacher told me that just because you have boy parts doesn't mean you're a boy, just because you have girl parts doesn't mean you're a girl. So mommy, what am I? There was actually a news account of a first grader, who came home and said, Mommy, what am I? Please take me to the doctor so we can find out what I am. And it was in the news because the family was taking the school to court for emotional distress. The daughter was like, because of what I'm learning about gender in school, I don't know what, I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl anymore. So there's a Facebook page. By the way, you've probably heard of the trend towards babies, gender neutral parenting. So this is not telling your child whether they're a boy or a girl. Let them figure it out on their own, And there's a Facebook page for these families. And on the Facebook page, it literally says, direct quote, there was no such thing as biological sex. It's just a social construction. So that's where we are now, is where the body versus the person has become so extreme that they can contradict each other. that your mind can be at war with your body. So the Christian, what would the Christian response to that be? I mean, the Christian response should be, why accept such a demeaning view of the body? This is God's creation. There's a trend now, you may know, towards detransitioning. People who transitioned and then decided they made a mistake. And I read an interview with a 14-year-old girl who had transitioned at age 11 and identified as a trans boy for 3 years, and then reclaimed her identity as a girl. And in this interview, she said, the turning point came, and this is a direct quote, the turning point came when I realized it's not conversion therapy to learn to love your body. And unfortunately, this interview came out after my book, but it would have been a great quote to have in a book called Love Thy Body.
Right.
But what it means, it was on a very secular, liberal website. And what it means is even secular people are beginning to see that the core of the transgender debate is, do you value your body? They're even you're starting to see this in secular websites. They say transgenderism is body hatred. They're using that phrase, body hatred. So even they are realizing that the answer to transgenderism is to have a higher view of the body.